Today, I'm pleased that Senator Jeff Merkley has agreed to participate in a discussion about the plan and what the federal government can do to advance it. The senator really needs no introduction. A native Oregonian, he was reelected this past November to a third term, and Jeff serves on several critical committees. He serves on the powerful Appropriations Committee, where he chairs the subcommittee on natural resources and environment. He also serves on foreign affairs, environment and public works, budget and rules. And clearly he plays a critical role in shaping our future, not just in Oregon, but nationally and across the globe. I am pleased that Monica Anand, CEO of Zapproved, has agreed to interview Senator Merkley. Among her many honors, Monica was recently awarded the Sam Blackman Executive of the Year by the Technology Association of Oregon. She's an entrepreneur deeply committed to our state. Monica, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And do we have Senator Merkley with us?
Yes, you do. I'm with you now.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Senator Merkley, for being with us. I can't tell you how excited we are to talk to you at such an important time. I wanted to also mention that the questions we've gathered also have attempted to encompass those that were submitted by the audience during the registration. So we've done our best to cover a whole wide-ranging set of topics here. And so I think it's going to be a great conversation. Well, I want to start actually with talking about the pandemic. We're nearly 14 months in, and we're wondering, what can you say to Oregonians who are tired, many of them whom are struggling to work and make ends meet, and who are asking when life gets back to normal? I think you know that the Oregon Business Plan has spent a lot of time envisioning Oregon as a place that rebounds from the pandemic more prosperous, more equitable, and more resilient. What steps can we take now that'll make our state stronger during this recovery period?
Well, Monica, thank you very much. It's been a really tough year, not just the economy and not just the disease itself, but the isolation that fighting the disease has created. So now we're at that moment. It's springtime. The flowers are popping up, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And people are starting to see signs that life might return to normal. Small gatherings of people who have been fully vaccinated, restaurants starting to open back up. And at the heart of this is a national strategy to say, let's help this rebound happen by working from the foundation up, from the small business up, from the individual and the individual family up, rather than from a Wall Street down strategy. So we passed the CARES Act that had a lot in it that helped out, but then the really big plan, the Oregon Rescue Plan, and that Oregon Rescue Plan has so many different features related to housing, to healthcare, to putting direct payments in people's pockets, to accentuating the checks, increasing the checks for those who are on unemployment, and helping with childcare. And when we think about all of that, the hope is we're going to have a really significant upswing in the economy. So less isolation, hopefully more employment, and kind of a return to something that we think of as more normal, and a foundation we can build on. For example, we help out in that bill with childcare. Well, childcare is really tough in normal times and super problematic during COVID. But can we learn from that and do better on childcare in the future than we've done in the past? So shifting some of our priorities, emphasizing the direct foundations for thriving families, which are healthcare and housing and education and jobs, I think are the right approach for us to take so we can go forward and get into a much better place and have this whole COVID in our rearview mirror.
Well, I think childcare is an excellent example of being better after making things better after the recovery. But I do want to spend a moment talking to you about racial equity, especially after the verdict recently. You know, for the last year, our nation has been focused on racial equity issues with an intensity that's unmatched, at least in my lifetime. we're recognizing, I think we all are recognizing that our society and our social systems need to change. But what's been done at the national level to address the historic equity issues in our nation?
Now, Monica, it really was the trial of Derek Chauvin really focused the nation's attention on after a full year in which we looked at the challenge of systemic racism, which I would boil it down to this. We have to have a society where our public safety forces treat everyone equally, that they respond to a situation the same if the situation regards somebody with white skin or brown skin or black skin. That we just can't have a situation where departments think of one part of the community as their clients and one part of the community as a problem, because that leads to profiling and it leads to the kind of violations of civil rights that can result in injury and death, as we just see day after day after day. Nationally, we have got to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And it sets boundaries for some of the things that result in injury and death on a way too often basis in terms of the chokeholds and so forth. It has a database so that individuals who really violate the public trust and do damage can't simply resign or be fired and go down the road and get hired by another department, because we find out that that's all too common. Many incidents where things go awry, we find out there's been a pattern of that in the past that the present employer didn't know about. It provides just a lot of elements that are designed to drive us in this direction, including training and accountability, so that we do work towards that vision of rooting out systemic racism out of our justice system. So it will truly be justice and not injustice. But I wanted to mention a couple of other things. In the course of this year, in which there was so much attention to the issue of systemic racism, I started thinking about a period of our history in which we don't really learn about in grade school. And this was at the close of the Civil War, and we passed the 13th Amendment, and we thought of the 13th Amendment as ending slavery. But in fact, it didn't end slavery. And that's the chapter we don't learn about. We don't learn about that almost within days of the 13th Amendment being passed, many states started to develop what were called black codes. And those codes said you could be arrested for being unemployed or loitering or speaking too loud or standing on the sidewalk. In other words, any Black American could be arrested for the crime of being Black. And the 13th Amendment said if you were convicted of a crime, you could be returned to slavery. And so the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were arrested, convicted, and returned to slavery. That resulted in the start of mass incarceration, and it had all the downsides of slavery, but it also sometimes was even worse, because under slavery, the owner had a stake in the health of the individual, but when you're rented into slavery, there was no stake, and so often even more horrific working conditions. So that clause that exists in the 13th Amendment that says slavery can continue if you're convicted of a crime was a result of, or generated so much abuse and mass incarceration that reverberates right on through to the present day. So there are about 20 states that have this in their state constitution as well. And Oregon right now is looking at taking it out. So I called up the legislators in Oregon and said, hey, Colorado recognized it shouldn't be there and got rid of it. Utah did, blue and red states. Why is it still in Oregon? Let's get it out, and let's get it out of the U.S. Constitution. So I'm introducing an amendment that to address this historic injustice. So it's one more aspect of trying to draw our attention and put us down a path to a more race-blind and more just society.
That's great. So the George Floyd Policing Act and this 13th Amendment sound like wonderful things that you're working on. Let's turn to talking about the American Rescue Act. The recently passed $1.9 trillion package, I think. It's a pretty complex bill. Broadly speaking, can you help us understand what does it mean for Oregon?
Okay, great. And I just touched on a few things earlier, but let me give you more details regarding that. And pretty much, we have about 1% of the national population in Oregon, a little over 1%, but it makes it easy to translate to, we get roughly 1% of the national money in each of these categories. So for example, what it means for Oregon is about $1.6 billion to assist in vaccinations and testing. So really crank up our vaccinations. I mean, I've been impressed within months, we've gone from less than 1 million to more than 3 million vaccinations a day. We've just got to keep pressing. And we've got to reach out to citizens who are harder to find and to give a chance to get to a local healthcare clinic or location to get a vaccination. I was talking to folks yesterday in one of our counties who were having an evening event where they were handing out gift cards as to publicize, hey, come get your gift card for some of our local businesses and get your vaccination at the same time. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. And suddenly people might show up who hadn't shown up before. So that's a key piece. Flexibility for state and local aid. We know there's a lot of responsibilities that the state and local governments had to take on. But instead of running the money for cities and counties through the states and slowing it down, we designed it so it would go directly. So every city in Oregon, every county knows how much money it's going to get. And for our state, it's about $3.5 billion being distributed in that fashion. Then we have the augmented unemployment insurance through August into the first week of September. We had those $1,400 direct stimulus payments. Education, we know the education system has really been stressed by COVID and children having to be at home. The student counseling, oh my goodness, I've spoken to so many counselors around the state who are talking about the stresses that existed within the homes and for the students. A few thrived on working over a Zoom link to their schools, but for many it was really isolating and a lot of mental health issues, including just depression, anger, disorientation. So help with education, help with children, we talked about that, help with housing, rental support, and support for the homeless, $35 billion. So that's about $350 million for Oregon to help out with those efforts. And you know, we see, you can't go to an Oregon city, a major city, and feel the impact of our housing shortage, our shortage of affordable housing. This, by the way, is something I'm going to be pushing for as a big part of the future infrastructure bill, because the rental support that's in this is helpful. The help for homelessness is helpful, but we need a huge investment in building out a lot more affordable housing, millions more units of housing. So that's covers most of the pieces except for the business provisions, which I want to accentuate because we did a lot in the previous CARES Act, but this bill includes additional support for the PPP program, additional support for the program for forgivable loans that turn into grants. Yeah. The whole idea was, we know our small businesses, they had all these expenses if they lost their customers. And some were really hit hard where we have extra help, like on restaurants and venues. But our world is better off, our community is better off with a really strong, thriving small business community. So helping businesses get through it and reemerge as the customers reemerge was a major effort in this bill.
Okay, so let's spend a little more time on the education that you mentioned, because the Act is sending quite a bit of money to state and local governments and schools and universities and those public entities. And so, we know that some of those dollars will be used to backfill existing programs, but there are opportunities to make like one-time transformational big investments. As you think about the business plan and our goals for shared prosperity, where do you think Oregon should focus these resources?
Well, one of the things that I'd encourage Oregon to focus on is the housing challenge. because it's affecting our downtown business areas. It's certainly, I used to work with the Portland Habitat for Humanity, and then I developed affordable housing. And I saw that when a family doesn't have a stable place to live, then things go off track for the children, and they never really recover. But everything improves with stable housing. That sense that you're part of a community, so you care about the community, the sense that you have privacy, that you have security, a place to work and do your homework, all those things are really powerful for launching our children into life. I also think Oregon has been and must continue to be a leader in the transformation to renewable energy. This is the world of the future. We're seeing the impacts of climate on our forests with the forest fires we have. We see it on our agriculture with the droughts and the fiercer storms. And right now we have a worst ever drought developing in the Klamath Basin that is just shocking in how bad it is. I mean, we are talking about the water for the refuge not being there. And that means the irrigators are going to fail. And it means that the birds that fly through are going to die. 60,000 died last year in a much better year. It'll be worse this year. It means there's not enough water for the stream. And so therefore the salmon are going to die, which has happened before when there's a low flow in the stream and so forth. So it's like our ecosystem and our farmers and ranchers are all impacted together. And we see it on offshore in the Pacific Ocean getting much more acidic. I mean, it's hard to envision that humankind could have changed the acidity of the ocean, given how big the ocean is, but we have, and it's starting to affect it in a significant way, like we artificially have to change the acidity of the ocean water, make it less acidic, for our oysters to survive. This is an area, and economic opportunity goes with being on the front end of addressing problems, because as the world catches up, you're selling products to the world rather than buying products to the world. So that's the second area I would really encourage. And then our basic infrastructure. And again, I think we're going to see that our roads, our bridges, our jetties, water systems for rural Oregon, I hear about all the time: clean water supply, wastewater treatment. And I can't stop without mentioning broadband. Now, there'll be a lot more for water systems and broadband in the infrastructure bill, but we haven't passed it yet. It's not guaranteed. So some of the flexibility of what the state has may be to invest in those efforts. You can't grow a city without water. You can't grow industry without water. And you can't have a healthy stream if you don't have a good waste treatment system. And this COVID has really driven home that broadband's essential. It's like electricity, like water. It's essential utility. It's communication, it is employment, it is your school work, it's your entertainment, it's kind of everything that is part of our life. And every house needs to have access to good broadband. So those are areas I would encourage focus on.
Well, I would definitely come back. I want to come back to the infrastructure and the clean water broadband in just a moment. But one thing I wanted to ask about was, this money is going to get distributed to a wide variety of public entities. So how do you think that Oregon should go about, what can be done to coordinate these investments to make sure that we have the biggest bang for our buck in terms of, impact to Oregon?
Yeah, so I think about it a little bit differently, Monica, in that because of money going directly to the cities and to the counties, the cities and counties have a chance to really take in what they have been hearing from their citizens about the biggest challenges in their particular area. So the challenges in Deschutes County are going to be very different than, say, in Columbia County. And so they've been going, we have these top 5 projects we don't have money for, and they're essential for our particular community. Those listening to the local citizens, and that's going to look different. And so maybe it won't feel coordinated because one county's projects or one city's projects will be very different from the next. But I think that's a strength, not a weakness.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so let's go back to, you were talking about clean water and broadband and all of the things for part of the infrastructure plan. And I wanted to know if you could talk to us a little bit about what impact you see these investments having on economic development.
Well, it'll be huge. The communities and the countries that are going to thrive in the future, one, they invest in their physical infrastructure, and second, they invest in the minds of their children, their educational infrastructure. It isn't going to be about having the biggest navy or patrolling, more of the world and being involved in more conflicts around the world. It's going to be about investments in the human side of our resources and the physical side. And the physical side does change over time, and that's why I'm emphasizing the importance not just of the traditional bridges and roads and jetties. So those are very important, and I keep fighting for those. But we also have to think of our housing as infrastructure, as our broadband and rural broadband being essential part of our infrastructure. And I'm really pushing in another way, which is to say we should think of our forests as part of the nation's infrastructure. So yesterday I was speaking in committee with the administrator of the EPA, and I said, you may think of our forests as something for the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Interior, the Forest Service to worry about, but can I get your help pushing for us to invest in the health of our forests? Because when they burn, they put a lot of carbon dioxide in the air, and that's your concern as head of the EPA. And he said yes, that he did see it in that sense. And I talked to the Secretary of Commerce, and I said, you may not think of our forests as something that touches on commerce, but we do have a forest industry that's very important. There's a lot we can do to advance it. But also when the fires burn our forests, it disrupts, and the smoke disrupts a lot of economic activity. So it has an impact on commerce. And she said, yes, I understand that. I get that. And I'll be there helping to push Interior to invest in the health of our forests. So really what I'm saying to folks is, look, with the drier forests, more lightning strikes, they're going to burn, they're going to cause tremendous trouble. And we have to respond to that with different forest management, which means more thinning, more prescribed burns, more mowing. And when we do that, it changes the character of a fire. And you can think about the fire a couple of years ago that was pressing down on Sisters, and everybody was worried that Sisters might go up in smoke. And it hit a section of forest that had been treated, thinned, prescribed burned, mowed, and then another prescribed burn. And the fire stopped because the fuels weren't there. And in addition, the firefighters could get through the forest more easily to the front of the fire to fight it. And when we do this type of forest treatment, if you will, it results in jobs in the woods, jobs on the logging trucks, jobs in the mills. And so it's also a jobs undertaking. So in the coming bill, which is being referred to as American Jobs Act, let's make sure that forest work is a part of it.
And so, Joff mentioned that you are, as from your vantage point as the chair of the Appropriations Committee on Natural Resources, subcommittee chair, do you feel those agencies are going to have the resources they need to do this work?
Well, the demand is huge. And, we've done a few thousand acres a year, but in Oregon, we already have 2.3 million acres that have passed through the environmental hoops to be treated, and we don't have the money to treat them. So I'm going to push, and so it's the spending committee that essentially funds the Forest Service, the tribal programs, BLM. I am pushing not only to have a huge factor in the American Jobs Act, as kind of using this as thinking about it as infrastructure, but then also to really increase our annual allocations through the Interior spending bill. Will it be enough? Probably not, because millions of second growth forests, and the trees are close together, they're the same heights, so fires move very easily from one tree to another. And we just, it's not a problem you can solve in a single year, but we have to do a much better job and focus first on the interface between the urban areas and the forests.
Absolutely. we have to do something to stop the cycle, the constant cycle of wildfire and destruction. Absolutely. It's been very tough on Oregonians, especially this past year during the pandemic.
Last September, I drove from the northern border to the southern border and back again. I never got out of the smoke. And that's almost unbelievable. You can drive 600 miles and not get free of smoke. And
Wow.
I saw towns in our state that were just, they were incinerated. And, you know, losing your house is horrific because you lose everything, all your family records, all your heirlooms, your special things that have been collected and passed on and meaningful to you. And all that's disorienting. But when the whole community burns, you also lose the community that would have helped you recover from that. And you often lose your job because the place you worked burned down. And this is just, it's horrific. It's scary as hell to think about that kind of fire with a blowtorch coming down on your town. It's not just making our forests more resilient. We also need to think about some of the causes of the fires. For example, the wind knocked down electrical poles that started fires. Well, can we in some areas take and bury those electrical transmission lines, make them more robust so that it's less likely to create those fires in the middle of high windstorms?
Absolutely. Okay, well, you're talking about this wildfire work and the forest work creating jobs, and you're talking about the Jobs Act, and so we're speaking kind of the economy. I want to ask you about one of the things that really affects Oregon's economy, and that's semiconductors. Oregon is one of the leading centers in the world for semiconductor research, design, and production. Intel is a big employer in our state. And this is proving to be a strategic product, even at the top of the federal agenda right now. So what can we do in Oregon to sustain and grow this industry? We know that big investments are being made by Intel and the ecosystem around semiconductors. How do we encourage that in Oregon?
Yes, we really want to incentivize domestic semiconductor research and manufacturing. So do the research here, do the manufacturing here. We are seeing this a fair number of chips that are essential to everyday manufacturing. There's a shortage, and they're coming from out of the country. So there was a bill called the CHIPS Act that we had as part of our Defense Authorization Act that said, no, as part of our national security, we should be building a lot of these chips here. And of course, we're in a tense relationship and probably will be for a couple decades to come with China. And that's also creates concern over the leverage and availability of chips. If they decide, well, we're going to sell our chips elsewhere, it could really have a big impact on our economy. So then we have this Endless Frontiers Act that is coming up. It's a priority for this session. We may even see it in a few weeks on the floor of the Senate. That is about domestic manufacturing, including augmenting semiconductor manufacturing. So supporting our chip industry in America, it's right for us from the viewpoint of being a key product to sell to the world. It's right from the viewpoint of jobs, and it's right from the viewpoint of national security.
Agreed. And do you have any specific advice for how Oregon, what this means to Oregon? I know at a national level that what you're saying is that it's really important for our nation, but in thinking about our state, how do you think about how this is going to impact Oregon and how Oregon plays with this trend? Well,
Senator White and I are going to do everything we can to help companies in Oregon get grants from these two bills. We want to advertise to the country the best place to make chips is in Oregon. You need cheap electricity and you need water. We have both, which is part of why Intel has thrived in the Oregon landscape. We want other chip makers to come and join in taking advantage of those assets. Getting that extra help for our current companies and recruiting more makes a lot of sense.
Agreed. That's great. Okay, well, Oregon is also a leading producer of vegetables, nuts, and many other agricultural products. Can you talk about your work and your priorities when it comes to the state's agriculture sector? And how do you see the role global trade will play in advancing our position?
Sure, you bet. So for the last several years, I've been the top Democrat on the Ag Spending Committee, which I've moved now to infrastructure, or not to infrastructure, but to interior. And what I really emphasized was a lot of support for research, our agricultural research stations. So extra help, just a couple of examples. One was our dryland wheat farming. The research on that is really incredible. I climbed up on a combine and they were showing me how they were measuring every possible thing as the combine moves across the field and mapping the field, every bit of moisture, just a whole list of things, a map that allows them to then apply products to the field in just the right proportions to get the best results at the minimum cost. And then they had all these experimental beds of or fields of different strains of wheat, because as conditions change, and for example, this is a very dry year, different strains are going to do better, and you want to plant differently than in another year. Plus, you also have to continuously have new strains that are more resistant to various diseases. And that goes across a huge range of products that we have in our state. I mean, the Willamette Valley grows everything. And then we also needed to take on some of the challenges like sudden oak death over on the coast, which really threatens our nursery industry, to invest in the productivity and sustainability and health of the shellfish, Pacific shellfish agricultural system. And then I made a special emphasis on hemp because it started with a partnership which I was working with Mitch McConnell. And folks who know that Mitch is at one end of the spectrum, I think the other might be a little surprised about that, but both Kentucky and Oregon farmers had a big interest in hemp. So we worked together to allow research plots of hemp. And then another year, we worked together to allow seeds to be transported across state lines. And then Senator Wyden got very involved, as did both of Kentucky's senators, Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, and legalized hemp. So that meant we needed to have more research, and we were able to fund a hemp innovation center. So Oregon University, Oregon State University is conducting that research. And then to really try to weigh in on the way hemp was tested to make sure it was fairly tested to discriminate between that and cannabis. Cousins, but not the same plant, very different in terms of any hallucinogenic impact. So all these things with a new crop in that situation, that was a lot of engagement to try to address. And so far, we've had kind of a boom and a bit of a bust, but it could become a very significant cash crop for farmers in Oregon, hopefully on a much more stable basis going forward.
Yeah, well, that's great. Okay.
And Monica, as I'm thinking about it, the another piece related to ag and infrastructure where they overlap is in irrigation piping. And so I really worked to get a lot of irrigation piping funding for Central Oregon, where they were trying to get more water to their farmers, but also allow more water to be left in the Deschutes River, which meant a lot better outcome for the health of that river. When you fill a reservoir in the months that the river is normally full, and therefore the river is virtually empty, you reverse the natural cycle and you affect all kind of the species that are used to the natural cycle. So you want to be able to leave more water in the river and lose less water in the piping. So that type of infrastructure, I think we have now over $100 million in the last couple of years channeled to that effort. And then disaster. When disaster strikes, Senator Wyden and I have teamed up to try to get help. For the wine growers whose grapes were affected by smoke, for the onion growers whose onion sheds collapsed when the snow was so high. We just, it's the fisheries assistance when we had Oregon's fisheries either failed or the market failed, as it did for seafood in COVID.
Yeah. Well, we know that upgrading the nation's infrastructure has been a big priority for you ever since you've been elected to the Senate. So thank you for all that you're doing. I want to talk about you're the first in your family to go to college. That's correct?
That is true. Yes.
Yeah. So can you talk about the importance of education and kind of in the context of building a 21st century workforce?
When I was in grade school, my father said, if you go through the doors of the schoolhouse and you work hard, you can do just about anything, because we're so fortunate to live in America. And I mean, his point was you had to actually make an effort, but if you applied yourself, you were so fortunate to have this opportunity, the public school system. And I thought that was pretty cool thing. And as I graduated from high school, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I enjoyed building things. My dad was a mechanic. We were always building things, mini bikes, stilts, racing cars, you name it. But I got very interested in what is kind of the history of our world, and what does it mean for humankind? I had these big questions that kind of means you have to go study things. But college at that point, yes, it was expensive, but not like now. In other words, we basically had debt-free college. And by that, I mean, you could go to a public university if you earned minimum wage working 40 hours a week in the summer. You could pay that tuition. And yeah, you may not be able to pay all your meals, but whatever debt you had could be modest. And I also worked while I was in college, as many students did. And so now we have, the college is so expensive that it's a crushing a debt that discourages children. I live in a blue collar community, and many of my neighbors say, we're not sure we should encourage our kids to pursue their dreams if that dream means going to college, because they may end up with this crushing millstone of debt and with no guarantee of a job on the other end. So we are seeing other advanced nations that are doing better on this. They are eliminating this fear and reality of debt. I think our community colleges should be essentially free. And I think our university system should be essentially debt-free. So yes, families that have more contribute, but families that have less contribute less in proportion to their finances. And we need to have programs for the whole range of possibilities, because some things you can do that you might want to pursue require a 1-year training program or a 2-year community college program, and need to make sure that the apprenticeship programs, so career and technical education. But that's why I've been pushing for investing career and technical education, because when I was in high school, I could take metal work class, and I could take electronics, which I did, and I could take woodworking, which I did. And there's a joy in working with your hands and actually being able to make things that leads to a lot of good paying jobs. As I traveled the state, and I had this Made in Oregon tour that I just went on trip after trip after trip. And the folks who were managing our factories and the heads of companies often said, the thing we lack most are welders. Well, welding is a technical skill that there's a lot of folks who want to hire you if you learn that skill. So we need to look at what the workforce, what the work world needs, what the manufacturing world and the business world needs, and make sure there are the programs in place for people to be able to fill those roles. I'll give another example, is that I've been talking with school counselors around the state who say we need a vast increase in student counselors because of what children have gone through and what parents have gone through. But there's no pipeline for it. Like we don't have enough people studying to gain the skills to be a counselor for our children. And so, we should be thinking then about how do we increase that program in our universities and encourage people to know that has a job on the other end, a very good paying job and a very meaningful job. So monitoring that and promoting and building the programs that really are there. And we should never have a child say, I dreamed of contributing to the world by pursuing this, but the cost of going to college was just too much, or there wasn't a program in my state to gain that skill that I really wanted.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the student counselors, because in my conversations with educators, I think we hear a lot about the ripple effects that good mental health has in the classroom, and just, disruptive things that happen that cause all kinds of ripple effects down the road of people being able to, classrooms being able to be successful. So, I think that's a really important one. You mentioned your dad. I was born in the US, but my parents came here from India, and they told us all along when we were children, that the reason they worked so hard to get us here is for the education, and that they were so grateful, and that I was so grateful to be able to be here to take advantage of that education. And so we just need to keep it accessible for everybody. And it really has just gotten inaccessible in some ways, many ways.
And another thing I'm really concerned about related to the counselors that was even problem before COVID is I was starting to hear, not just from counselors, but from administrators, from teachers, saying our incoming classes, our children coming into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're more chaotic, more disruptive than in the past. And I said, well, what is the story behind that? Is it families affected where the parents are affected by meth or opiates, or is it the economy and loss of jobs is resulting in more tension in the household? What is it? And they said, Senator, a significant factor is the change in how children are raised because of smartphones. And I was really shocked to hear that. And I've raised that question now with a lot of educators, and they say yes, that when a child is fussing, instead of picking them up and holding them or talking to them or putting them on the floor with a bag of blocks, people hand them a smartphone, and that it changes the way children kind of develop, in that they engage less with others in their play, and therefore aren't get the social skills to be able to kind of sit still in a classroom and listen to a teacher say, this is how it works. And so I just mentioned that because it's not something that I think any of us expected to be an impact, but apparently it's real, and it's a real concern. And another reason we need to, we need to observe and respond and think about how we address it.
Now the world is changing quickly, and we have to adapt to what we learn all the time. Okay, well, that last but maybe not least, at least not, I don't think it's least for me or for you, is for months now, there's been a lot of discussion and debate about the integrity and security of our elections, as well as our public institutions. So can Oregonians, what would you say to Oregonians and Americans? How do you assure them that our elections are safe and that our institutions are functioning in the way that they're meant to function?
Well, Oregon citizens have a lot to be proud of because we really pioneered vote by mail. We pioneered automatic voter registration. We made the commitment as a state that every person should be able to register. Every person should be able to vote. We are committed to the vision of government by and for the people. And we need to spread that commitment across the country, because there's a tension in society where some folks say, we don't really trust the people to vote, and we want to try to make it hard for them to vote, make it difficult, because they might vote for leaders who don't share our goals. And maybe their goals of some might be, let's help the richest people get richer. Well, that's very different than investing in healthcare and housing and education and good paying jobs for ordinary families across the country. So we see this now also in terms of tension over race. And this goes right back to our founding. And when we were founded, we had the vision of government by and for the people, but people didn't include everyone. It didn't include women. It didn't include Native Americans. It didn't include communities of color, and it didn't include the poor. And over 200 years, we worked to say, no, that's not the full vision. That's not equality. That's not equality of opportunity. And we made these changes with the 14th and 15th Amendment, with the 19th Amendment for gender, with the Native American Voting Act of the 20s, and with the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, or Voting Rights, 1965 Voting Rights Bill. And we thought we'd gotten there. Okay, we've achieved that vision. And now we're wrestling with backsliding. The notion has been this: individuals who or leaders who don't want people to vote want to restrict voting just to election day, because election day can be easily manipulated. You can reduce the precinct locations. You can understaff them so people wait in long lines. You can locate them where there's no parking. And then you can have social media put out misinformation about where the locations are, misinformation about when voting day is. Because we've had people send out broadcast texts that say, sorry, you missed the election last Tuesday. So people would think, oh, I missed it, and don't show up the next Tuesday when it actually is the voting day. Those of us who believe in government by and for the people, we want to take away that ability to manipulate the election day. So we support early voting, we support vote by mail, we support automatic voter registration. And this has really been accentuated after this last year, because essentially President Trump, former President Trump, told this big lie to the nation that the election was stolen and that there was illegal voting, and therefore we have to get rid of vote by mail. We can't allow early voting. We gotta restrict it just to election day. And so you have all these bills being passed all over the country to restrict the ability to access the ballot, or to do things like say, yes, you can vote by mail, but you have to make a copy of your driver's license or passport. Well, one, if you don't have that document, which you're not required to have a driver's license as an American citizen or a passport, that's a problem. And then you have to make a special trip to go make a copy. Well, okay, much less likely you're going to get that ballot in the mail. And that's the point. That is the goal, is to make it harder for you to get that ballot in the mail. So I am leading the fight to take this on through S1, and it's called For the People Act, and it takes on and protects the ballot box for all Americans, protects voter registration, early voting, vote by mail, the integrity of people being able to vote. And it also takes on gerrymandering, which is an assault on the vision of equal representation. It should be the case that people pick their politicians, not politicians picking their voters. And it takes on the dark money, the billions and billions of dollars that flow through our campaign system that nobody knows where it came from. And it goes through a whole series of laundering from one organization to another. And so shining a light on all of that, so you can't use that multi-tiered effort. You have to disclose who the donors are. Just as you and I, if we donate to a candidate, if we donate over $50, we have to be on the report of how much we donated. Our name's right there. It's required by law. And so on the other end, you have millionaires putting hundreds of millions of dollars into elections, totally undisclosed and secretive. So not preventing essentially the most powerful in our country from secretly buying elections. That's what taking on the dark money is. So that's what the For the People Act is: restore the integrity of our elections. And to get it passed, we have to take on another problem, which is the priorities for one of our political parties require simple majority votes under Senate rules and precedent. And the priorities for the other party require a supermajority, or 60 votes. And those are the priorities for healthcare, housing, education, jobs, equality of opportunity, taking on environmental issues. So our Senate, our US Senate, has become corrupted in that the priorities for the powerful are simple majority and the priorities for the people are super majority, meaning that Mitch McConnell has a veto over them. And that's just absolutely wrong. I think everybody can understand it should never work like that. So I've been working to find a path to have a level playing field and get rid of the McConnell veto, or as it's called, the filibuster. McConnell got rid of it on his priorities. We should get rid of it on priorities for the American people.
Well said. Well, I'm checking the time and we're getting close to the end of our time. Is there anything, Senator Merkley, that you feel like you want to leave with the Oregon business plan community?
You know, the Oregon business plan community has worked year after year after year to help identify a productive path forward for our state to thrive. And when our businesses thrive, our workers thrive. We have more funds, tax funds to invest in the infrastructure, both the human infrastructure of education and the physical infrastructure. So it all works in a positive direction. So thank you, a big thank you to the Oregon Business Plan team and all the businesses that participate. It's always striking when we're able to meet in person. And we have 1,000 people down at the convention center and kind of many hundreds of businesses, maybe 1,000 businesses represented, thinking about how to make our state more successful. And that's a really important dialogue and conversation that contributes to building back better, as the phrase goes, as our President Joe Biden's phrase go, build back better. Well, that's an important part of us building a better future for all.
Well, thank you for all the time you've spent over the years with us, and thank you for your time today. And thank you for all the hard work you do for all of us in Oregon and for all of us in the United States.
Thank you,
so
Monica.
I really appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for leading another great interview and conversation with obviously one of our most important leaders from our state in a true Oregonian, in Senator Merkley. I also want to thank Senator Merkley for his time and his valuable insights and his decades of service just to our state and to our country, and the continued role that he plays in making meaningful change for us, for our future. I think there were some very good words in there today and things that we all need to kind of take hold of as we think about building out of COVID and the situation that we're in today, and as we kind of build forward for the next decade as we prepare for our future. I'd also like to thank our partners today from Oregon Business and Industry and the Portland Business Alliance for not just their collaboration on this event, but collaboration that we have across several things that we do together. Thank you for that. And I'd ask everybody that's still around to join us on April 27th with Representative Susan Bonamici. On April 29th, we'll have a conversation with Representative Cliff Bentz. On May 5th with Representative Earl Blumenauer. And on May 14th, we will continue and close this round with Senator Ron Wyden. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a fabulous afternoon in this great state that we live in, and we look forward to doing this continued work together. Thank you.